for giving.
We want to make sure that every single penny that you give, we want to help you to make sure that that giving is as effective as possible so that you can give the most you possibly can to the best charities that are out there. The best charities out there from our research have 75% or more of every dollar that you give going to program services, going to the cause that you care about, and 25% or less to fundraising and administrative overhead. That's the kind of charity you want to look for.
And he said the best charities, right? It's a qualitative characterization, and he used the word effective.
So we want to make sure that every single penny that you give, we want to help you to make sure that that giving is as effective as possible.
But the problem is Charity Navigator doesn't measure charitable program effectiveness. This is what it says on their website right now. At this time, evaluating the effectiveness of the charity's programs is out of our scope. Now, you shouldn't be going around on YouTube telling people that the most effective charities are the ones with the lowest overhead if you don't measure the effectiveness of charity. Now, these are remarkable organizations because they've managed to control the national conversation. And I don't mean to demonize them. This is, you know, they've been trained in the same stuff, but they're remarkable with what they've been able to do with very little. They're very small. So that if you look at them in terms of staff, altogether they have a total of 24 staff, compared next to nothing compared to the approximately 10 million people employed in the nonprofit sector as a whole. Between them, they have an annual budget of roughly $3 million, or next to nothing compared to the $300 billion Americans give to charity every year. In terms of the number of charities they have records on, 6,800, and that's if there are no duplicates, or next to no organizations compared to the roughly 800,000 active charities in the United States. And none of them measures program effectiveness. And I don't blame them for that. You know, measuring program effectiveness is expensive. So what you have here for an evaluative system in the United States is next to no one, spending next to nothing, measuring next to no organizations, and then teaching people to ask, of all things, the wrong question. So I'm going to wrap up and leave some time for questions just by saying at a tactical level, what we have to do is we have to stop using this word overhead and start calling things by their real name. You know, don't call a visionary new leader who we hope can eradicate this social problem overhead. Call them a visionary new leader who we hope can eradicate this social problem. We have to, at every level, at the board level and at the donor level, at the institutional funding level, stop asking this question, what percentage of my donation goes to the cause, and start asking questions about what good you're doing, what progress you're making toward your goals, and what those goals are. And I believe we have to build a magnificent national assessment apparatus that can put meaningful and useful narrative information, video information, survey information online on an iTunes-like easy user interface that's updated on an annual basis so Americans can log on and get great information about any one of the hundreds of thousands of charities they might be thinking of donating to on the spot. And last but not least, at the most fundamental level, nonprofit organizations have to start to lead again. Instead of appeasing donors with what they want to hear, they have to start talking to donors about what it's really going to take to solve these problems. And it ain't keeping overhead low. It's building organizational capacity and strength. And they have to start to set ambitious goals for the eradication of these problems. So thank you very much for your time and for listening, and I'm happy to take some questions if we have time for that. Thank you. Yes?
As of right now, is a higher percentage used for overhead and administrative purposes? Is that in any way indicative of more effectiveness in charities right now?
I'm not sure I understand. Can you ask that another way?
So for charities right now that spend a higher percentage for overhead, do you know at all if they're being more effective with their causes?
Yeah, there was a study done by the Ford Foundation. It's a great question. By the Ford Foundation, the Atlantic Philanthropies, and a couple of other organizations that was run out of Indiana University Center for Philanthropy called the Nonprofit Overhead Cost Study. They looked at Form 990s of 120,000 charities, then they did surveys of 1,200 charities, and then they did case studies on 22 charities. And that's probably the best, most recent study pointing to a strong correlation between organizational effectiveness and spending on organizational capacity and strength. Yes?
I have two questions. One, what do you think about L3Cs, which are limited, low profit, limited liability companies? They're just like a new legal structure that came out a couple years ago. And two, do you have an opinion about like a company like Geneva Global, that they're like a philanthropic like navigator, they track where like grant money goes? They first of all like seek out business ventures in like, you know, South Africa, and you know, the companies compete for their grant money, and then they file like annual, quarterly reports to see, you know, how effective their money's been.
Well, a couple things. I've talked to the guy who set up the is it L3C or LC3 in Vermont, right? And I sort of understand it. I've spoken to a number of attorneys about it. The IRS hasn't sanctioned it yet in terms of tax deductibility. These hybrid concepts of for-profit and non-profit entities are, you are very interested in charity. Don't stop asking that question. And it depends on what kind of endeavor you're starting. Like in the case of our business, Pallotta Teamworks, I've really looked at whether you could put some kind of hybrid together. And I don't think that you could because of the solicitation factor, and you need tax deductibility. But if you're selling some kind of product for earned revenue, then joint ventures between nonprofits and for-profits can make sense. I'm not familiar with the other organization you mentioned, but I'm a little wary of, happy that people are starting to focus on effectiveness, but a little worried that we're going to trade one very simplistic measure for another very simplistic measure and continue this paternalistic pressure on charities as if they don't know best how to solve these problems. And institutional funders are constantly putting pressure on nonprofit organizations in that way. I don't think we'll find one metric across all causes that can evaluate effectiveness. I doubt we'll find one within a given cause, because one homeless charity may be doing very different work than another homeless charity, which is why I tend to think the best metric is to measure an organization against itself. What are your goals? What progress are you making toward those goals? How do you know that you're making progress toward those goals? And in some cases, an organization can't even answer those questions and shouldn't be faulted for that. You know, if you're doing some kind of, I don't know, after-school mentoring program, you know, the results for that might not show up till 12 years down the road. I don't know how you measure 4 months into that what impact you're having and have a judgment made about whether or not you should continue to receive funding. It's a difficult arena, no question about it, but also no question about it. This question about overhead is the worst possible question we could be asking.
I'm involved in a leadership for a private foundation that focuses on funding cancer research for a relatively rare disease. And this overhead question comes up a lot with us. When we evaluate grants, we look at how much of our money is going to go to the overhead of the. And when you're pumping money into big institutions like cancer research centers and stuff like that,